Hi, Ben.
Hi, Cara. How are you?
I'm okay, thanks. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go at like 3:30, if that's
fine.
okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah.
I can't remember. So I was coming because Lisa said it would be good to talk about where economics might fit.
Yes, I think so. So one of our sections is looking particularly short at the moment, and we thought that some discussion of the economics would be useful. I think it's 10.5. No, yes, yeah, 10.5.
Dropbox.
Hi.
Hi, Valerie.
Hi, Valerie.
I'm not sure whether I'm here or not really, but I thought I'd just check in to start with and see
Yeah.
how it goes. But hopefully you're going to get some more useful people. We had a go at doing our earlier sessions this morning. So we
Okay.
do 10.0 and 10.1.
Yeah.
But we haven't really done the discussion, which we decided needs to wait a bit anyway, but we didn't have time. Took us all our while worrying about whether we ought to number the introduction and the discussion, whether if we did number it, it was going to be 10.0 or 10.1. So.
Any recommendations from this morning on
I think there was one thing that we moved, but Lisa's in charge of all that. Yeah. I mean, we just went through and tried to make decisions on the things. Most of it was fairly straightforward. There are a few places where nobody was quite sure what the person making the comment had meant, so we guessed.
Yeah. So I think the only other person we're waiting for is Chris, but he said he might be a bit late, so I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, we can. Well, he's last, so we can start. I don't know if Ben, if you wanted to run this.
I don't mind. It's up to you. I don't want to take it off your hands if.
No, go ahead. Go ahead.
More experience. So I think the idea, what we were hoping to do, was try and go through, for those who haven't already been to some of the sessions this morning, was to go through the remaining comments from the external reviewers, and see whether or not we can make some progress on those ourselves, or whether we need to have a further discussion as a full group on Tuesday. I actually was looking through earlier, and I think there's actually very few remaining comments on these 3 sections, so it might be a fairly quick decision on quite a few of those. And I think as well, while Cara's here, she said she needs to leave about 3:30, so perhaps we could focus on this first, as to talk a bit. I think section 10.5 is still relatively short, and one of the comments was talking a bit more about the economic dimension to the interacting factors. So I think, Cara, you're on the economics paper, so.
Yes, I am sorry. Yeah. I was just reading through.
No, it's fine. No, I realised they're very much putting you on the spot here, but
yeah, I was.
Lisa, is there anything else I need to say about that? I know this was kind of more.
No, perfect. Yeah.
So I guess just seeing how it links in with what is being said in that paper, and making sure that we're not rewriting anything that's being said elsewhere, but also highlighting the important things in terms of policy relating to economics.
Yeah, so I think the economics one, it's kind of that. So I think they see the link of where economics falls for the policy decisions more within the policy paper. So the economics paper at the moment is much more focused around really 2 aspects. So really linking. It's more about linking epidemiological models to economic models. So it's more the kind of scientific aspect of it. But my understanding, and I could be wrong in saying this, my understanding is that the reason that that hasn't actually happened this time is not because it may be in part a failing on the scientific community not working sort of together, but also from a pushback from a political perspective of economics is out of the remit of what SPI-M are meant to do. I don't know, that's not really a challenge, so I'm not sure I'm really helping with the challenges bit. But to me, and I feel that that's something that I can't see the economics paper is going to start really, will really go into, because it kind of, the economics paper is more about how do we make sure we incorporate economics and epidemiology, and how do we do this boundary bit. But then how do you make sure that that modelling work feeds into policy, I think is a kind of a separate question, and maybe slightly more overlaps with what the policy paper aims to do. But I don't know how to put that as a challenge, because in a way it's a challenge from the institutions of the way government is set up to a certain extent. That's been my understanding, that when they try to do stuff that looked a bit more at the economics, they were told from on high, which when people say to me on high, I assume means Cabinet Office, that's not their remit, because SPI-M is actually a subsidiary of the Department of Health. SPI-M isn't actually a subsidiary even of SAGE. So they are really there to advise from a health perspective, which I know many people say that health and economics are interlinked and you can't, separate the two. But then that starts getting into the realms of the Department of Health versus Cabinet Office and economics. So sorry, Valeria, you had your...
I just wonder if I could ask a question, because I'm not really totally sure how, when you say SPI-M is a part of, or set up by the Department of Health, so it's an advisory body set up by the Department of Health, but the members of it are academics with academic posts and so on. So are they being paid? Do they do it as most academics do? It's just one of those many pro bono type of things we all do. So they are not actually being prevented, presumably, from doing other work. They may not have time to do it, which is sort of a different issue perhaps. But I mean, in a sense, they must be free agents to decide what they work on and how they work on it.
That's true, and I think some of them have been doing and are working on it. So like Mike Tildesley and Matt Keeling. But I guess the point is that if they do that work and then it doesn't, as people seem to talk a lot about it, landing with policy. So they try and present it to policymakers, but it doesn't go anywhere because they say. So I think it's that connection, I guess, that I'm kind of talking about. That I think the economics paper is to talk about the linking up in the scientific community, like how can we better make sure that there's epidemiologists talking to economists. But even if you had fantastic links there and you'd had all this great modelling work done, I think there's still a question mark from the people on SPI-M that even if they had that, it would have been slightly pointless, because none of that would have landed with the policymakers, and they would have just ignored all of it, because they would have said, we only want your advice from a health perspective, and a scientific perspective, and anything to do with economics, that's out of your remit.
I guess they could publish it anyway. But I guess that also, I mean, that's an aside, that also a bit perhaps links with Graham's comment about the economics, because the economics, as he sees it at least, is done by the Treasury. And I think Frank said something about that too when we talked to him. And the Treasury will very much see anything remotely concerned with economics as their remit. So I can imagine that they don't want people stepping on their toes in doing the economic modelling. But
That's a fundamental problem, isn't it?
Yeah. So the question is what we say here, really.
The other thing I thought would draw to people's attention is the way that the WHO independent panel have a pretty strong statement that you should ignore the economics. Can I share my screen?
Yeah, I think you should be able
Yeah.
to.
So yes, you may have to get rid of the pictures of ourselves, which is getting in the way of it for me. It's basically saying if you look after the pandemic, the economics will look after themselves. Whereas, you know, one suspects in this country, it's been a bit the other way around. It's well, it says something a little bit more, a little bit less definitive, perhaps in this next paragraph.
But I guess the question, even with that, is that up front, could they have, I mean, I'm sure if you ask people who do work at that sort of interface between economics and epidemiology, do that kind of modeling, I think they probably wouldn't be surprised by that. But I guess there's that argument that had that initially when they were making this advice to government, and there was maybe pushback from them saying, oh, well, we're trying to weigh up the health impacts and the economic impacts. If you had a modeling framework that incorporated both of those, you could make a stronger, could you make a stronger argument that, well, no, actually, even though it seems as if in the short term you're impacting your economy in a negative way, in the longer term, because of the way in which disease interacts with the economy, in the longer term, you'll be doing better for the economy. Like whether if they'd had that kind of remit, they could have made a stronger case.
Yeah. I mean, just sort of thinking through under what circumstances would the WHO panel not have said that? You know, imagine a disease that was like COVID, only much less serious. So suppose it just, you know, as it were, sort of just laid you up feeling a little, no one suffered worse than feeling a little bit snuffly for a day or two. Or, you know, but it was embarrassing and took people off work for an afternoon or something. So, you know, it was a disease, but it was absolutely minimal. Then presumably the WHO would be agreeing with us that to shut down your entire economy for it would be silly. It'd be better to just take the hit of everyone having an afternoon of snuffling. So I suppose trying to sort of reconcile these and points of view, perhaps what the independent panel are essentially saying is that the dynamics of a pandemic are such that really it's a 0-1 thing. You know, either it's worth dealing with, in which case the way to deal with it is to make dealing with the pandemic take absolute priority and deal with it as quickly and efficiently as you can, and the economics will look after itself. Or the alternative is, as in my snuffling example, you do nothing, you just ignore it. Or I think they are. I think what they're saying is that the economics of a pandemic are sort of 0-1 thing. You know, it's either best to deal with it flat out, or it's best not to deal, or best to do nothing. But the idea that there's somewhere in between where you sort of weigh up the economic benefit and the trade-off with a few more cases of disease for you know, saving certain billions of pounds for the economy doesn't really occur. I mean, I tend to agree with that broadly. I think it's possibly, I feel it must be a bit of a simplification. It can't be quite as black and white as that. But I think that's really the implication of what they're saying. And
I think that's right on the macro scale. But if you think about the questions that government's trying to answer at the moment about how you come out of lockdown and which bits of the economy you open up first, there's an interaction between the disease dynamics and the bits of the economy you open up. It's not about, yes, if you've got a big problem you have to close down, which I think is what the WHO is saying, but it's how you go from the naught state to the one state. You don't just open up in one day, because we've tried that and that was awful. And it seems to me this is where economic modeling and epidemiological modeling need to work together, whether you should open pubs or whether you should open shops or whether you should open schools. And there should be a lot to say there from those coupled models of economy and pandemic. So it might be that you have the same effect on the epidemic from doing two economic things, but one might be really good for the economy and the other one might not be as you're coming out of the lockdown. And it seems to me that's where these interactive models, these coupled models, should really help, that you put so much into the economy by opening restaurants, but you will generate so many new cases, whereas you will put less in the economy by just opening department stores, but you will not generate as many cases. And then you can start to make rational decisions.
Mm-hmm. Sounds very convincing.
Yeah, I think it's trying to understand those trade-offs, isn't it? And that's where like the economic models can come in into their own.
I think you need to have an interactive model that's not just an economic model. It's not just a epidemic model, because they're the one influences the other. And I think that's the case for having coupled models that are coupled quite tightly.
Yeah, and I think
But
it's
of course
also
that goes absolutely against the sort of treasury rule that we were being told about earlier, that says leave the economics to us. And it's so I think hopefully we could make the big broad point about, to an extent, pandemics are a bit of a 0-1 thing. So but we could go on to say that that doesn't mean that there aren't interesting challenges in as you say, doing that. But then I think, continuing the argument, you're saying, I'm sure rightly, that it's a very interactive process, and therefore to understand it, you absolutely have to consider the economics at the same time as the science, the medical, the health science. And that is a challenge for policy, precisely because it's the kind of things that I would have thought very likely ours is not the only government that's set up to not like doing things that way. So it's therefore, it's therefore a policy challenge to get government to accept that actually the economics may be so entangled with the health that it really does not make sense to try and separate them out, which is very much what our government's done, isn't it? I mean,
yeah, I also think economics I think the problem is that it's like a broad term that maybe means different things to different people. So there's the economy in terms of like the gross, like the GDP and how much money we're getting in and people's livelihoods. But then you can also look at economics in terms of the framework in which they work in that they are looking at trade-offs between, you're trading off. So for example, with schools, you're trading off the potential increase in cases, but against the negative effect of children not being at school. And trying to understand and unpick those trade-offs is quite difficult to do. But if you use an economic framework using some kind of like optimal control approach, so you could look at it from that perspective, which doesn't necessarily get into the realms of the Treasury. But I guess there is that question of, should there have been people on SPI-M who could look at more have that more economic approach, that trade-offs approach to things? It's just it's one way you could.
And I think, I'm not sure if you're alluding to that, Kira, but it wants to have the sort of social and behavioural things. I mean, you might have one policy that's a slightly greater hit for the economy, meaning the financial side, but actually leads to a whole lot of stress and mental illness because it puts people in very difficult situations. I don't think we all know that some of the things to do with lockdown and so on have had very nasty social impacts, and particularly where they've had social impacts on the poorer in society, they seem terribly unfair. And avoiding those, in my view, needs to be balanced against saving what may on the face of it look like bigger sums of money. So
and I think that's where some economists could help with that, because they try and put values on these.
Sure, no,
things
I
that are
think
difficult to
I think
unquantify.
switched on economists appreciate that it isn't just pounds, shillings, and pence. It's social and behavioural impacts as well. Sure, so well,
But
social, broadly speaking.
Yeah, and I think maybe that's the thing. It's more looking at like the behavioural economists, because I think that the comment, because I think Graham I saw made the comment about SPI-B and they did work very closely with SPI-B. SPI-M and SPI-B worked very closely. Was I right in thinking that, Lisa, that he kind of was saying that was something that they did already?
Yeah.
That it wasn't a challenge, and I think that is true. That was my understanding. But I guess, again, what do you mean by behavioural scientists? So I think a lot of the behavioural scientists they got on with people who and I don't know, because I don't know the remit of SPI-B totally, but were more people who were doing sort of the questionnaires or understanding like the intricacies of people's behaviour. And so it can be very difficult to see how that fits in with like the modelling. Whereas if you could look at it, tap into more economic behavioural economists, they might provide like a mechanistic approach for actually modelling that kind of behaviour. Yeah. So I think it's, I guess, I mean, maybe you could just, that bit kind of, I think, just fits in with that whole part of the fact that SPI-M and even SPI-B, they're quite small research communities that sit within this larger research remit. And it's, to me, it seems all about linking up with other research communities and how better to do, like relevant research communities, and how better to do that. But maybe I'm missing the point. So I think, I guess what I'm saying there is maybe that I don't know that I would, because when you say combining scientific expertise, I don't know that I would pull out specific topics. Maybe you could give some as examples, but I feel like some people might say that those people worked well together. Yeah, I do, but other people might say that because they have a different opinion of what behavior is, if that makes sense. So like when I talk to the behavioral economists, they complain that all the models coming out of SPI-M don't incorporate behavior. But if you talk to people on SPI-M, they say that they have worked very closely with the behavioral scientists. And so it depends what lens which you look it through. So maybe that point is more about the challenges about linking in with the wider scientific community and relevant and people who are working on relevant things rather than specific disciplines.
Yeah.
So maybe that's where the economics comes in.
Maybe we just need to say something about broadening the modelling to include social and economic aspects would be useful.
Yeah.
Now I know there's the turf wars in Whitehall, but one can imagine that if those models had already existed at the beginning and that was the information that was given, they might have sorted their turf wars out because they were getting useful stuff. So they won't ask for it, but if you give it to them, they might respond in a very positive way.
And also, I mean, this section is headlined understanding interacting factors. So perhaps we need here to sort of focus on the interactions and the sorts of point that Peter was making earlier. I mean, we keep making all this stuff about communicating and groups and so on in all sorts of places. So we need to come at it from different angles in different places, and perhaps here it's the interactions between the groups that are of most importance.
But I do think it's that interaction with SPI-M. So my understanding is it has been a real challenge in that people have had work or things that they think is useful or relevant to people on SPI-M, and in a normal world they would be able to email that person and say, oh, I've got this relevant idea, do you want to come and hear this talk, or I'd like to come and give a seminar to your group. But they were all just so insanely busy that suddenly they became this like little group of people that nobody could talk to and nobody knew how to get hold of, and everyone was like telling them that they had the answer. And I feel like there was kind of a piece missing of some way in an organized fashion that they could better interact with the wider community. And I don't know what the answer or how to set that up is, but I feel like there was that missing link there. Like, I guess what I'm thinking, Valerie, is like in IDP, it was very difficult to get some of them to even come to the talks.
I was even thinking the same thing.
And
yeah, but so, I mean, it's interaction, but maybe somebody, I can't think who it was, might have been Peter again, touched on the point that if you've got these things, these connections in advance, then you can build on them. I mean, it's too late when things are underway, and as you say, everybody's frantically busy, to expect to put communications and mechanisms in place and all that. And of course, what we are thinking about is challenges for future pandemics. So we need this interaction, but we need it to be set up in a way that it already exists, rather than trying to crank it up from the beginning.
Yeah, I mean, one challenge might be that. Yeah, I mean, I think SPI-M was maybe just too small for the scale of the problem, and what you kind of needed was some way of, and so that's why I think LSHTM and Imperial were able to kind of capitalize, because they had at the helm of their groups people on SPI-M who could then come in and filter it down to the large members of people working within their groups to work on problems. But then there's no way to sort of hook up with the wider research community. So it's like, I don't know, you kind of, it's almost like you need a kind of a wider group of people who are actively interested in working on pandemics or have some interest in it.
I've heard
called upon
exactly the opposite. So being devil's advocate a minute, people saying exactly the opposite, that the problem in the UK was that we had too many groups, and the countries that did better were much more focused with fewer experts, and they just, you know, knew what they were doing because there was only one path. But so happy medium.
Well, I think in the paper we do. I mean, we don't exactly provide solutions, but I think we do address some of these issues in talking about talking about the need to prepare the community, and the need to think how you actually will wish to organise this in another emergency situation, so that you're not having to create a system on the fly.
Yeah.
Because I think the I mean, as far as I can see, the situation in Britain largely relies on researchers in universities who are generally doing things in research mode, as people in universities do are being required to switch to effectively working as a national laboratory type function.
And to not be paid for it. So I think that was a big challenge for all of the people on SPI-M. They were having to do all of their teaching load and do the work for SPI-M because they weren't being paid. They had no funding for it. So I think that has been a challenge.
Yeah, I made a comment in one particular discussion when there was the issue of whether we got paid for COVID-related work came up. Lots of people are getting lots of money. Why shouldn't we? And it does seem a bit odd given all the vast amounts of money which are being expended on all kinds of things associated with COVID, that if scientific advice on which policy is based, which is probably fairly cheap compared to test and trace, is not funded.
I mean, when you consider the amounts of money involved, it's utterly ludicrous, utterly ludicrous, really, that the people on the main advisory bodies, I mean, would that be 100 people or something, that the government isn't prepared to look at, to have a scheme which would employ someone junior to do as much of their job as possible, or whatever. A sabbatical scheme of some sort. But
I guess initially nobody thought it would go on as long, and at the beginning.
I suppose
over
these
the
things
summer,
were
people have got a bit more time and so on, and then of course it goes
I think quite a lot of them also actually were, of course, standing committees, and in normal times, it's probably perfectly functionable as a pro bono thing. I don't know how often SPI-M met in.
I think it was like once a month, and it was like virtually no time or effort for people. It was very little.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm really sorry. I'm afraid I'm going to have to go, but I hope that's useful. And I'm happy to have a look at the section 5 or whatever and make comments. That's useful.
Yeah, I think that'd be really, really good. Thank you for your input.
See you guys.
So based on that, do we have enough to make a go of that before Tuesday?
I think so. Yeah, there's some bits we can add in. Yeah.
Yeah, I've made some notes. I think you are as well.
Yeah.
And I think that pretty much, answers Graham's comment that basically they didn't have any interaction with the economists on this. Is there anything else you wanted to add to 10.5 or anything we can expand on, or is it mostly that, do you think?
I think I'd also like to ask the economics group if they were to write about policy, what they would write.
Yeah. You've been attending some of their meetings.
I've been to one so far, but yeah. I think they feel it should go in our paper, but I think they're probably the ones that would know what they want to say.
Maybe.
So yeah, I think that's something we can chase up. I can email Kira about that as well. Yeah.
Because I think the Hans comment on 10.6 covers a lot of that as well, in terms of matching what Peter was saying in terms of joining together societal, economic and epidemiological aspects of the models. So he's kind of put that in 10.6, but it seems like that is probably just an extension of what we've talked about for 10.5.
Yeah, so maybe we want to move that comment to be dealt with in 10.5.
Yeah, so I didn't respond to that one other than just to say I think this needs more discussion because I wasn't sure which section, but we can leave that up to the previous section. Yeah, maybe do that. And I don't think there were any other comments, so there wasn't much on 10.6. Again, I'm not sure whether this was similar to Chris's, that people hadn't got expertise in this area, or whether
Who wrote 10.6?
that was myself and Peter jointly.
I just wondered, cause you've got, I just noticed it sort of jumped out at me. Third paragraph? No, I don't know. Anyway, just before the penultimate paragraph on that page, that first page of the section. Models should be models developed in a principled manner. Now we came across principled manner earlier in 10.0 or 1 in a little bit, and we realized we weren't quite sure what whoever wrote that bit had actually meant. We assumed it meant sort of according to pre-established principles, you know, so that it wasn't, I forget what the context was there, but that things shouldn't be done on the fly, basically, that, you know, they should be in place and done according to some principles. Now, is that what was meant here too?
I think, yeah, that's probably what I meant in terms of developing models that are statistically robust, and or if they're kind of mechanistic models, then they're based on mathematical or biological first principles.
Okay, okay, that's not quite the same.
I think that's what I would mean, that they don't violate science.
I'm trying to remember where it was in the earlier section. I think it was, does anybody remember? Yes. Here it was something to do with support will be needed to ensure that technical analyses feed through into policy decisions following, well, we changed it to following established principles. I think it said before, it said in a principled manner. So I think there, following established principles can cover everything. I mean, I think that's fine because it can be technical principles as well as any other sort of protocols. But maybe down in whichever section we're talking about now that I've lost again. 10.6, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Maybe it could be just explained a little bit. Would that be worthwhile? So that
certainly.
I think we should have something there.
So that it's clear what's being got at there in terms of, as you say, statistical principles or whatever.
I'll comment into that and I can work on that before Tuesday. Thanks, Holly. Anything else for 10.6? Okay, we can move on to 10.7 then. Chris, I don't know if you want to lead this discussion.
Yes, again, it's a section where there wasn't a huge amount of feedback. Was the one specific question is whether there was anything particular on this area that came up in the discussion with Frank on Friday?
Yes. Sorry, I meant to. There's an email that I will write to you to explain in more detail. Yeah, so the discussion we came to is that it would be helpful to have some view from someone on the inside sort of more recently. So Frank has just put me in touch with
John Aston.
John Aston, yes, who's just finished as Chief Scientific Advisor, I think, in the Home Office. So will have been in government at least over the last year. And he's agreed to look through it and have a call with us. So I'll forward that email to you, and then we can get some feedback that way.
I think the point that Frank was making was that mainly we've been thinking about things looking from the outside in, even if it's people like Graham who are much closer to the inside. They're still not, Frank was making a distinction between those who are seen as trusted advisors and so on within the various departments, which would include CSAs who have signed the Official Secrets Act and so on, and in front of whom they would be prepared to talk openly, as compared with people like himself, Graham himself, or to some extent Frank, who is now outside the system, who are seeing things from an external perspective. And so it would be useful to know how things really work on the inside in order to be able to think about implementing change. And I think that was what he was suggesting, that discussing, if you were able to discuss, you and Lisa, with John, we might get a little bit of that handle, because he's free to talk because he's outside the wall, but only just come outside it. So, it might be.
Yeah, that sounds very good. I mean, I often comment that the best people in industry to know are often recently retired people.
Yeah,
I think it's the same idea, isn't it?
Yeah, it is.
Yeah. And then Frank's sort of own views on implementing change moving forward was very much a sort of collaborative viewpoint, pushing for sort of, I guess, connecting with academics in advance, sort of lots of the things that we've been talking about in other sections, so that you have those sort of networks and contacts in place for when you need an expert quickly. He was pushing that far more than trying to embed modelers into policy, thinking that a sort of at least immediate solution is to improve existing connections rather than try to overhaul the sort of structure.
Yeah, I mean that's a bit like it's one thing we got onto in a consultancy project where we got a little bit, as the academic consultants got a little bit too close to saying how we thought the entire regulatory structure of the energy industry should be rewritten. And but what we ended up doing, which was actually the message we were trying to get across, was saying what functions are required. And I guess it's a little bit like that it's not so much about exactly where people sit as if things are going to work properly, or what functions need to be available in the support community.
Yeah, and John will be able to give his own thoughts on that as well.
Okay, so I think, does that cover everything? There was one comment which is about how we develop the will, and where does that come from for people to actually, or what's the incentive for these changes? Is that something we can respond to, or will that come with further discussion? John, do you think, from the inside?
Yeah, because it would be interesting again to get his view, because I mean, my feeling is you get the different layers of this. I mean, you obviously get the question of what people ultimately want, but you can get the different. You sometimes get situations where, which I think does come up here in government modelling, that everyone says yes, we like the guidance laid down in the Aqua Book, but are people really ready for the logical consequences of what that's saying about, or what that implies about what well, at the end I'm involved in, what kind of uncertainty treatment would be required, and how that would quite radically change a lot of modelling practices.
Yeah.
Can we say anything about the incentives from our point of view, from the modeller's point of view?
Yes, I mean we talk. I think this. I can't remember exactly what's in other sections, but I'm just looking back over what I currently have in there on incentives. It's all becomes a little bit of a blur. What's been in discussions, and what's what actually went in. We refer to, in particular, university academics might not have direct incentives to coordinate with the rest of the community to be ready to advise in emergencies, depending on the norms of their discipline. It's we. I mean, I could. I might have been treading on, feeling I was treading on eggshells a little bit there. But I suppose a different way of putting that just came to me is to say, I'd have to look at exact wording, would be to say something like university academics might not have the incentives to self-organize into the kind of structures needed without some kind of coordination or incentive or pull from government.
Yeah, I think that's a good phrasing.
Yeah, I'll just write myself an email with some words like that. But one of those things that it's one of those things that you kind of look at it, and then it's just when you happen to be always talking about something else, it comes to you.
Well, I think that essentially covers all the comments, unless anyone has anything else. Do we need to, everything suitably referenced, all the sections, or do we need to add any more?
Yeah. This is one thing that I need to look at referencing. A lot of 10.7 really came out of my head and my experience and discussions with people more than it came from literature. So I can think what we can put there. Though I mean, to be honest, my general feeling is that in areas like this, what one tends to end up with rather sort of bland or arcane documents where there's too much concentration on embedding in literature, because I think a lot of there's a lot which I think a lot of what is being written down comes from people who are quite removed from actually taking part in these kinds of processes, and it can be difficult to find things to cite which actually do come from people who really know. But I'll have a look at that. That's something that's been in the back of my mind.
There's a fairly good list already, but I was just wondering if I'm not sure I've put many in 10.6, so I might need to go back and look at that. Maybe something to do before Tuesday if we get time. Is there anything else, Lisa, that you want covered?
No, I think that's good, actually. Yeah.
I think we were lucky that there was relatively fewer comments on this.
Yeah. Yeah, a lot faster than we were this morning. Yeah, so we can leave it there and finish off the bits we've mentioned for Tuesday. I think it's coming together.
Yeah, it's looking good. Okay, well, thanks very much for joining, everyone, and maybe see some of you at the Juniper talk, which I think is now, or at the next meeting.
Enough time for Dennis to get a cup of coffee.
Yeah, not just Dennis.
Okay. Well, we've got 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
All right. Take care. Bye.
Bye for now.
Bye.
Bye.